Hi there, and welcome to the Creative Endeavour podcast. My name's Andrew, and this is the podcast bringing you inspiring stories from creative professionals from around the world. And in this episode, I'm talking to Daniel Bilmes, who's an extraordinary artist based in Los Angeles in the United States. Now, as is the case with many of the artists that I interview here on the Creative Endeavour, I've been following Daniel on social media for a little while now, and I'm blown away by his work. He has a technique with painting portraits that I haven't really seen before. It's an extraordinary way to apply the paint. He creates these surfaces and this amazing, intricate detail in a way that you wouldn't really think. It's incredible. It's more about removing paint or manipulating that paint and revealing more of that underlying surface than putting paint on. So I wanted to find out more about this technique, but also more about the man behind the art and work out what makes Daniel tick creatively. This conversation went in so many different directions. We talked about the technical aspects of Daniel's art, also his creative journey and his beginnings. This was a great conversation, and I certainly got a heck of a lot out of it. I hope you will too. So without further ado, here's Daniel Bilmes in the Creative Endeavour. Well, Daniel Bilmes, welcome to the Creative Endeavour podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Andrew. It's good to be here. This is actually my first podcast.
Oh, awesome. Excellent. We got there first. We're first to interview Daniel. Awesome.
Yep.
Well, look, I'm familiar with your work. I've been following you for a little while, online, of course. And, I must admit, your technique is one that I've not come across that application of paint before. You seem to have a unique approach to the figure and the portrait, which is just really refreshing. I really enjoy your work, and it's great to just have an opportunity to connect with you, because I do want to talk all about your paintings. But as I was doing a little bit of digging into your background and your past, I realized from reading your biography that you actually were brought up with art in the home, and this was a big part of your early influences. Take us right back to the start, Daniel, of when you first got the inkling that you wanted to do this as a professional.
Well, first of all, thank you for the kind words regarding my work. And to go all the way back, my father and mother actually are both artists. And when I was a little kid, my dad actually had an illustration school in Southern Oregon. And so I was basically drawing as a child. And then when I was about 8 years old, I asked my dad if I could, go to his school, because it was, exciting, and there was this feeling of oh wow, that's where the adults are studying. And it was sort of it wasn't just drawing. I was actually kind of enamored with the idea of going into an actual, school environment, because we were also homeschooled. So at the time I'd never really set foot in a school. And so the entire idea of going somewhere for education was super interesting, and it was my dad's school. And so I started studying with him when I was about 8. And then my mom, she actually used to be a fashion designer. And so she, was an artist back in Russia. And then when she immigrated, she finished high school in New York. And then she went to Parsons for fashion design. And that's actually where my parents met, when my dad was basically finishing his degree in Parsons in fine art, and she was finishing her degree in fashion. And so kind of growing up, it was a lot of art-related themes and things like that, and then a lot of encouragement, obviously, to draw and paint. And I was always just interested in it. And then I think right around when I was 8 and I started going to his illustration school is when I started to really sort of get more and more serious at it. And kind of, I don't know, probably when I started getting competitive, because I am definitely competitive. And for me, it was almost at an early age to compete with the adults. And then it was basically I started teaching when I was 15. So then it was basically kind of just kind of get competitive with myself and just kind of see how far I could push it, how close to repping I can get, things like that, childhood ambitions and whatnot.
So you were teaching art at the age of 15.
Yep.
Man, that was phenomenal. That is absolutely amazing.
It was interesting because it was a smaller town. So Ashland, Oregon is where I grew up, is where my dad had the art school and whatnot. And I was kind of curious too, as like a little punk going up there. Like I knew my shit, but coming in as an adult into a classroom and then having 15-year-old tell you what to do, I was actually curious at how the students would take it. And surprisingly, the students were super into it. As soon as they kind of realized that there was, good data coming to them, they were super respectful and actually listened and did everything and zero complaints.
Wow. So when you cast your mind back to those early classes, as a 15-year-old teaching,
Mhm.
how do you feel you compare now to that? I mean,
That's
obviously
an
there's
awesome
been
question because I
there,
have thought about that totally.
yeah, go on.
Um, I'm a lot nicer now.
Okay.
So basically, I gave great data, but it was like you can correct it here, 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 and here. This is an issue. So it was basically like a quick and dry analysis
Mhm.
that wasn't necessarily off. But I've realized over the years that you know, short form data of where everything is off and how they can improve things isn't the only aspect of teaching. There's inspiring, there's motivating, there's engaging, there's, you know, tailoring and adapting what you're explaining to the actual specific student. Like I've learned to do that a lot more and actually understand what the student needs and trying to sort of convey things in a way that they can actually accept and understand. Whereas back then it was a little bit more sort of one way fits all type of instruction, which it wasn't wrong. It was just more sort of short form and direct.
Yeah, so there wasn't that softness or subtlety to your
Not quite
instruction.
as much, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, again, my parents both Russian Jewish, and I was raised homeschooled with a pretty sort of academic
Mm.
spin to it. It wasn't a lot of hippie stuff. It was just study through the summers, study through the winters. And yeah, I wasn't aware of how softly people are used to receiving things and how important it is actually for most people.
Yeah.
Because I got used to I don't mind in the sort of training environment if your coach is yelling at you or something like that. I'm like whatever it takes, to be that sort of peak performer. But for a lot of people, it's not how it works, and for a lot of people, it's actually very important to be able to hear things in a format in which they can actually accept and understand them. Otherwise, it's not even helpful. And so, you could be clobbering someone with the answers that they actually need, and they won't be able to hear them.
We're all individuals, aren't we? We all have a different approach or a different mechanism by which we do obtain this information. It's almost like a key in the lock. They're the lock and you're the key, and you have to have the right shape in order to open them up. And I found that with teaching. One thing I'm curious about though, Daniel, is as you were teaching, did you find that your own artwork personally developed and changed through having to, because I found this for myself, right? When I went into teaching, suddenly I found I was gaining a new level of understanding. The person learning the most in that class was me.
Absolutely. I think most teachers go through that, or at least decent ones. And that's kind of where, especially starting so early, you start to realize the gaps in your own understanding. Because to be able to explain something fully is different than kind of intuit it and just kind of generally kind of guess or, figure out how to make it work. To be able to articulate, and explain it from different angles and to answer questions, you almost have to understand it at a different level.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that doing that from an early age really helped me with my entire journey as well. So it's yeah, I think teaching was instrumental in my own development for sure. I
Yeah.
actually think that it's not a new concept either. Traditionally, in the past, you always had sort of more advanced students help the, more junior students. And a lot of times the actual sort of professor, teacher, artist that, was basically, just only involved in some of the more advanced things. And a lot of the grunt work was done by more advanced students. And I think that that sort of process of understanding kind of from a very junior position of, learning the basics to sort of kind of pushing yourself through that and then to actually mentor and help others, I think it's a really important stage in personal development as well.
Mm. Wow. So you mentioned going to homeschool or doing your education formally through homeschool. That's something that I've been very interested in recently. And if you don't mind, I wouldn't
Yeah,
mind just going
not
off
at
on
all.
that little tangent a little bit because I went to primary school and then high school, and I think with my
Mhm.
parents and work commitments, there was no way that anybody would be able to take care of me. And I would have been probably pretty happy taking care of myself, painting, drawing, doing that sort of thing. But I don't know how to form a question, but I guess I'm just so curious as to what that would have been like,
I'm
and
I'm getting
what
the question. You're like, how did it happen?
how
Did it
does that
actually
work?
work?
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, you're obviously a fully functioning
I
adult.
I
It didn't
I
do you
I
any
don't read
harm.
so good.
Okay, okay. Well, neither do I,
So
and I.
it's like, yeah. No, it was interesting. It was different. I didn't realize how sort of unusual and unique it was at the time
Hmm.
because, my dad basically my parents were in New York. That's where they met and that's where they sort of, married. And then when they decided to have a family, they actually moved from New York to Southern Oregon. And it was at the time like, Grants Pass, Oregon was like a tiny little survivalist mecca. And they literally, my dad had a real estate agent send him a key to a mobile home. He didn't know what a mobile home was.
Oh, yeah.
And so they like fly into Southern Oregon, drive over there into the woods to see their new mobile home. And my mom just starts crying. Um, and so it took them a while to sort of acclimate. And then they found like another town that was kind of closer to what they were, looking for in that same area. I mean, Oregon's super beautiful, but it was, definitely a big shock, especially in the 80s from New York. And basically, when we grew up on like 20 acres surrounded by like BLM land, running around building forts and sort of studying at home. So we weren't just homeschooled, we were like in the woods. You know that Captain Fantastic movie or whatever?
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah.
it's basically kind of like that minus the Marxism because my dad sort of left the Soviet Union, so very anti-communist. So it's basically
Okay.
other than that aspect, it really kind of was that type of vibe a little bit more.
Yeah.
And my mom basically, stopped working when they had a family, and so she
Hmm.
was involved with the schooling. And then my dad was, doing a lot of illustration work at the time when we were super little, and then he kind of worked himself into messing up his shoulder. And after he messed up his shoulders, when he actually started teaching, and so
Okay.
he started an illustration school at the time because that's the space that he was in.
Hmm.
And, my mom, when we were little, dealt with the academics, and then we had a lot of tutors. And
Right.
so, there was once you get past a certain stage, like we definitely had a lot of tutors come in. Some came to the house. Some, like my parents were always doing different trades with, other homeschooling families. Sometimes, like someone else would teach us English. My mom was great at math, for instance. And so there was like exchanges, and then there was also hired tutors. So all kinds of different sort of alternative means to just give us all of the information as sort of quickly and efficiently as possible.
Mm.
Like we didn't take summers off. So it's like we
Mm.
wouldn't do the full math books. We would just skip the first third because it was all review and just do 2 or 3 years of curriculum in a year. And, we were little kids, basically. My dad's kind of like, yeah, you can't go to school. They're not teaching you the right things. It's like, super basic stuff, because they came from the Soviet Union. They looked at the public school curriculum in the US. They were just kind of like, ha, nah. Um,
Wow.
and it was just like a lot of like more sort of like academic, and there was also four of us, and so
Yeah.
like especially my brother and myself, we were kind of competitive too, and it
Mm.
wasn't like you're just sitting there by yourself. So it was like it was a norm within the family because there was more than one of us kind of going through that process. And I
Wow.
think that, and the fact that we were kind of removed up on a mountain, made it super just normal, to be honest, at the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. That's incredible, man. Because when I have children, I can tell you for certain they will not be going to school. They're not going
You
to
see, you
school.
see what I mean, though? That's
Oh,
kind of
man.
where it's like I think a lot of,
Yeah.
people are realizing that more and more now just because like, you grow up and you're like, dude, I wasted so much time, or it was also miserable. A lot of people get picked
Yeah.
on. Like it's like
Yeah.
not really, I mean, you can gain certain things for sure.
For
I
sure.
actually sometimes it's funny, my wife laughs at me because my brother and I both like, movies that have to do with schools, some sort of like coming of age stories or like movies about high school or whatever.
Breakfast Club.
Not like fully seriously, not Breakfast Club. I'm saying like whatever,
Yeah.
I don't remember which ones, but like because it is kind of fascinating to me, like the
Yeah.
entire premise of like a bunch of kids thrown together in like this weird sort of social environment. And, it also surprising to me how much people struggle with that.
Mm.
And
Mm.
like I might have too. Like I wasn't
Hmm.
there. Like as an adult looking at it, it's almost kind of like looks fun. It doesn't look like you'll learn anything, but it looks fun.
I tell you what it did for me. I it I couldn't work out. And I might have mentioned this on the podcast. Certainly talked to my buddies about it. But if I had a time machine, I had an opportunity to go back and
Yeah.
just put this head in my 14 or 15-year-old body, I would have just closed up my exercise book and walked the heck out. The teacher, meanwhile, going, Andrew, where are you going? Sit back down. I'm like, you have no power over me at all. I'm leaving.
Yeah, pretty much.
Because the way I see it now is that, and I have so many examples, and I'm sure a lot of people listening, so many examples out there of the way school or the public school system in general, in the West anyway, Australia, New Zealand, the United States, they're teaching you in one particular modality, one format, one way to kind of, you have to repeat back the answers that you were given. And critical thought and creative thinking is driven out of the children from a very early age. I remember going up to the front of the class in what was social studies at the time. They since called it something else. And I went back to the teacher, querying him on this bad grade that I got on the test. I said, I gave you the dang answer. What do you want? And he said, Andrew, you gave me the correct answer, but you didn't give it to me in the way that I wanted to hear it. I'm like, are
Yeah.
you freaking kidding me, dude? What, you want me to just repeat back to you exactly what you said? He's like, yes, Andrew. I'm like, what am I doing here? You know?
Yeah, no, for sure. And like from my understanding too, like the whole premise of multiple choice answers on everything too is basically like it's just
Wow.
also like a whole nother skill set of like, process of elimination. Like I remember when I like
Mm.
I we basically did most of like K through 12 by the time we were like 12 or 13, my brother and I anyway. And then he went to college super early when he was like 13. I actually took a few years off to work construction because that's when we were remodeling the building that turned into the art school in Ashland. And I was like super into construction at the time because I just thought it was super fun. And so I was in there like 12, 13, like, laying tile, building floors, framing and all that kind of stuff. And then when the school opened up, I was like, okay, maybe I should go to college too. So I went and took my placement test. I think I was like 14 at the time. And like I felt super rusty, and I'm taking the math test. I'm like, oh man, I don't know, like I'm rusty, right? And then I think I aced it completely, and so like as high as I could place in math, and I was like, because it was multiple choice, it was like, well, that's obviously wrong. Like that looks right, because I still knew enough, I remembered enough to where I kind of had that gut feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, dude, this is how you take tests, because like we never did multiple choice at home. Like the whole concept was such like a weird sort of like, here's three options, one of them's right, so you already have a 33% chance totally blindly of getting, a third of the questions right. And then, or you said you have a, 100, almost 100% chance of getting a third of them right. And then if you have like any sort of idea or remember like kind of general rules, you can pretty much pass it without knowing the answer to half the questions.
Mm-hmm.
It's weird.
Oh man, totally. Totally. But there, right there, and is a thing right there. I mean, multiple choice. Where's the thinking in that? Where's the thinking? Where's the exploration? Where's the diving into a concept and
Totally.
exploring it?
Totally, man. And so to continue that, I went and then I took the calculus was great. The funny thing is, the most exploration I've ever had and the most sort of encouragement from teachers to be creative and to actually challenge and sort of debate, granted my limited experience, was from the math teachers. And because math has always been my favorite, and like I had like a really good math tutor growing up, and she was kind of like, her only on her report card to my parents, the only issue was he's overly competitive. Because I was basically like, I went into this kind of like, there was a kind of this like a homeschooling center type thing where we were at, where there's like a lot of tutors and things like that. And I came in there and I was like, I want to do algebra 2 and I'll do trig in the same year. She's like, why? I'm like, why not? And so, I was getting super competitive, and I was like asking her what the other students were doing if I was the best, because I needed to make sure that I was like, had the best grades and whatnot. And she was just laughing at me. But yeah, my math teachers always were very encouraging with that. And then I remember I took a history class in Southern Oregon University, and I disagreed with the woman's take on history. Like, she's giving me an example. I'm a big history buff. My dad is as well. I grew up reading, like, books this big, Greek history, Roman history. That was like literally my pastime. I just read. And so, I'm basically like disagreeing with her on her take, and I'm like kind of trying to like engage and be like, and like there was no, like, it wasn't like, oh, I got this little kid in the front row kind of trying to like question my take on history. It was more of like this pissy, politically correct kind of like, oh no, this is how it is kind of situation. And I was like, this is retarded. Like, and especially because of history, like history is literally like the teacher's not that necessary. The teacher's literally reading books and telling you their take on history. You can read the same books and come up with your own take. Like, I used to love reading like the same accounts of the same battles by, let's say, like French and English authors, because they were always at war with each other. And like the same battle has like a completely different explanation by two different sides. And so what I realized is if you really want to kind of generally get a glimpse of history, you basically have to read multiple takes from multiple authors in multiple countries, preferably, about similar accounts. And then you can kind of sort of get an idea of what happened. Because, like, the victors write history. And so, like, if you take one take on it, then, like back in the 80s, even like American history, you read it and you're like, whoa. And like a lot of the books are still not that updated. And it's kind of like, that's not real history necessarily.
Wow. Yeah, very true. So the teacher didn't take too kindly to that.
Not too kindly, no.
So you're reading these big fat history books, and yet you're telling me that you don't read so well. So
it was a joke.
Okay. Yeah. You do read well.
Well, passively well, yeah.
Excellent. Because
I've practiced enough, yeah.
I refuse to read. That's the thing now.
Really?
I don't read at all, and I should. I really should. It kind of hurt me, and it's not that I want to blame my dad and throw him under the bus, but my dad and my stepmother, when I was very young, I had set reading time every day. And I was reading dumb books and stuff, and it wasn't. Sometimes I got to choose, and I choose these twist to plot novels and various things. But most of the time I'd sit there and fake it. I would just fake it out to protest. But what I found was really interesting. I grew up with these like Reader's Digest, National Geographic type picture books, like huge fat books on a particular subject, like New Zealand and the Pacific Islands, Australia, the Himalayas or whatever. And so I'd open up these books, I'd look at a picture, and the only bit that I could be bothered reading was a caption that went to the picture. So now my recall with images is really, because I was training that rewiring in my brain.
That's super cool.
Now I remember like dates, names, places, but it's always associated with something visual. But I don't.
And it's funny. I'm like the opposite. I don't remember names, dates, or places, but I remember concepts, systems, the way things function. I've always been process based, so it's like for me, it's like an understanding of how things work almost.
Wow.
And so like I would read the data to find patterns, and then try to apply those patterns to sort of my understanding. Wow. And so like a lot of my reading consisted of sort of like almost building baselines of data, so that you can understand when things are anomalies, when things are sort of within the norm, how general things work, like human nature. History does repeat itself. And like for me, a lot of it was studying. It was like my dad is well read. His mom was a director of a library back in the Soviet Union. And that was kind of his escape in the Soviet Union. So he basically would like take these books and like escape in them. And he always dreamed of getting out of the Soviet Union. And so when he finally did and eventually had a family, his sort of, contribution other than art with the whole educational thing, because we were homeschooled, was just these lists of classics. Like I remember like struggling through Les Mis when I was like, 10 or 11. And it's a 1,000 plus pages. And I still remember that book more vividly than a lot of books I've read within the last year. And that's kind of like, there's something about that young age. Like if you can actually get to the point where you can read at an advanced level, I almost think it's more valuable to read some of the books where you don't even understand the whole thing, but you're getting exposure to such nuance and such like a brilliant understanding of humanity and subtlety that, it impacts you pretty dramatically. And so like my favorite author still is Maupassant. And I remember reading Maupassant when I was, super young, and he's like a, 19th century naturalist writer. He actually died eating his own shit in a mental institution. But the guy's, so brilliant, such an understanding of life that sometimes it's almost like overwhelming but like, at such a young age, you're getting exposed to these, brilliant minds. And like actually it was really impactful, but like to me, it almost like made it difficult. Like when I started interacting with the rest of the world, I remember it was like, sitting there in my time, I would read like 9 hours a day, and then, homeschooled. So I didn't have a lot of sort of friends, and we didn't do the whole social thing. And then as like a young, adult, a young teen, kind of getting out into the world, even when I was teaching, and started like hanging out with, more of the, always older people, but, still people in today's society. And I had like a big disconnect. I was like, this is not how people should act. Like there's no subtlety, there's no nuance, there's no, nobility, or, there's aspirations of these sort of lofty goals that I was brought up with. And it wasn't even my parents teaching me that, it was the books. And so like my parents are very sort of noble and everything, but I'm more saying that like, they immigrated from the Soviet Union. They have enough sort of real world experience to where it's not that. It was actually like my expectation of reality was based more off of the books that I was reading than my own sort of observation up to probably when I was about 13. And then I remember when I was like 13 was like almost that loss of innocence, that sort of puberty combined with just my personal observation being like, wow, people are just not doing so well. Like they're not trying very hard to not be, or they're not trying very hard to be the best that they can be. And that was like a really interesting thing to me. Like everybody was like talking about killing time, and like I didn't know what hanging out meant until I was like 13.
Hmm. Isn't that interesting? Wow. 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 Wow.
Yeah.
Killing time, hanging out. Yeah. Chilling out.
Yeah.
That is so interesting. I came head to head with that in Australia because there's something
Mm-hmm.
within Australian culture that drives ambition and goals and these lofty aspirations. And especially if you're a kid and you're saying, oh,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be a this, I'm going to be a that. There's something about culture there. And again, this is not to put down my Australian brothers and sisters out there, but there is something within culture, at large, that they call it the tall poppy syndrome. So the tall poppy grows up, it's the first one to get cut down.
Mm-hmm.
Bring it back down to the level of everything else. And I found that, and you're so right that this is. It's so. What do you think's behind that? Why do
So
you
the
think that
interesting
is?
thing is there's I actually have multiple thoughts on that. Even if you think about like necessity for society, like, before you had craftsmen making things, one-offs, and everybody, artists and things like that. And then like, industrial revolution comes and you actually need factory workers. And so there's like a big incentive there to make people a little bit more kind of simple, more sort of worker type, because it was then necessary. And I'm not even saying it's like some sort of, by design type of thing, but the necessity, the sort of the need for the worker became more prevalent.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, I'm actually like not even saying I have an issue with people like following their bliss. I was just more saying that was me then, because I was so into reading these sort of like, lofty goals, lofty aspirations. Like I think that if, you're happiest following the waves and surfing, good on you. And if you can actually pull that off and live your life doing what you love doing, great. Like I'm not actually saying that everybody needs to like try to climb over each other to be the best at what they're doing. But that definite, general sort of social push to do the best that you can, I think that is coming back a little bit, and it has existed in society, but what that meant has changed.
Mm-hmm.
Because like, in the 50s, there was a different idea of what doing your best meant versus, let's say, right now. And every generation, there's a little bit of a shift there.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely do think that, in my understanding, especially like, like I'm in LA right now, and everybody's trying to do something. And a lot of people are trying to do something that they don't even know what it is, but they just want some sort of accomplishment because they know that it's important to have some sort of accomplishment and to push yourself and to grow. It's just a lot of times people don't even know what that means or how to go about it. And everybody wants the rewards without the effort. And so that's kind of where a lot of times I think if you're not raised in a way to where you know that like, oh, you want a lot, that means you start working early and you work a lot and you learn and you study and you push yourself, because that's how you're able to accomplish a lot. Whereas, people are raised in a way to where they're like never told that they need to, work their ass off. And then eventually they're told that they should want a lot. And so now you have like a lack of ability combined with the, craving for much, and it leaves people feeling super empty and feeling like they're failures, but they're not, because, they didn't set out to do anything. They didn't fail. They didn't even know that they wanted something that was difficult. So they didn't put the time in to sort of get a head start. And then eventually they're basically struggling with this sort of feeling of helplessness because, they're looking and they're like, their goals are so far away. They feel like it's too late to start. My advice is it's never too late to start. Like, you can do, like, there's people that started in their, middle years. There's people that started at, changed careers, had life-changing experiences, all kinds of different things. And so, like, if you have a head start and if you can start, working towards, large, lofty goals early on, that's great. If you had fun as a kid, great, start later. If you, love what you're doing and you're not into lofty goals, even better, enjoy your life. And that's kind of where I'm at, whereas, like, I almost think that people owe themselves an attempt at happiness, almost, an attempt at doing something or building a sustainable model of life that will allow them to progress and to feel accomplished and to feel like they're growing as a human. Mm-hmm. And that's the responsibility, not for society. And, you do help society in that type of position. If you're someone that's trying to grow, I think you're automatically helping society, because if everybody tried to be the best version of themselves and to grow and to flourish and to basically work on themselves, the world will be a much better place. Oh, and totally. So my whole thing is like about personal responsibility and about sort of self-knowledge. Take the time to actually get to know yourself, understand what you actually want, and then try to build a pathway or a way to actually move in that direction. And it's kind of that simple. Super complicated, super difficult to accomplish, but it's not the most complicated concept. And like, I talk to people, like, even as a teacher, people say, what should I do? And like, I'm like, after that, I'm like, what do you want? It's like, depending on what you want, you do completely different things. And that's the whole, like, and that's where it gets back into that whole, like, one size fits all answer or curriculum. It gets dangerous because you're training people to be drones, not to be individuals. And then you're surprised when people don't want to do anything.
I think that's by design, Daniel, in all honesty.
Not arguing necessarily.
I think that's by design, that people are trained to be drones, and that it is a breaking of the programming that is so difficult for people to do, to then, and I think what you're describing there, I agree with you. What you're describing there, though, has given birth to this new age self-help industry where you sit back and you wish for something, and it's just supposed to happen because, I'm following my bliss and I'm meditating 7 hours a day, and I wrote down on the bill that came in $1 million, and I'm going to pretend this is a check and it's going to come in. And whilst you're saying,
I'm in LA, man, I know exactly what
you know what I'm talking about, man. Yeah. And listen, I have personally spent, like an idiot, tens of thousands of dollars on CDs, DVDs, books, and seminars and personal one-on-one coaching with people to just try to figure out something that I could have found for myself. And it cost me a lot of money to end up at a place where I was like, you know what? This isn't the answer. The answer is exactly what you were just saying. It's a simple concept. It's hard to do. And it's literally, what do you want? And get to work.
Here's what we do. We just need to start packaging it and selling it to people for millions of dollars.
All right, you and me, we're going to team up here.
Okay,
awesome.
We're going to become the new self-help coaches. No, honestly, the funny thing is I'm in LA and I actually have a lot of friends that are life coaches and whatnot.
Life coach. Oh man.
Yeah, life coach. And what I'm actually saying is it's weird because I have almost like I think a lot of people need help.
Yes.
And that's kind of this thing. And towards like, you can't actually, commit your life to something without getting some sort of compensation. So like, I don't actually, like, I used to kind of have a issue with the whole premise of life coach. Mm-hmm. Now I just think that it's like, just like any industry, most people that are, a lot of people that are in it, especially without regulations, you're basically sharing whatever you want to share. And so like a lot of people literally are giving the wrong data. Mm-hmm. And so, like as I'm saying, like the prescription changes based on what the desired outcome is. And so when somebody says, I have the answer for you without talking to you, without hearing what you want, where you're coming from, that's usually a red flag, you know, like it's not a one size fits all. It's not like it's like, you know, people want to learn how to draw and paint and they're like scrolling through Instagram. There's an ad saying one day, all the master's secrets, every single thing you need to become a brilliant painter. Just send me some money and I'll give you all the answers. Like
That's a great
people
idea
actually
for an
sign
ad.
up for right,
I'm
right,
just
yeah,
gonna
yeah,
write
yeah,
that
yeah.
down.
But basically, like if it was only that easy, and people have this idea that there's a secret answer, that there is some sort of magical information that is going to bypass all the rules that everybody needs to abide by. And you know, there is good data. I actually agree with that. There's totally good advice, but it's, you know, it can like help you know where to go, but all of the work still needs to be put in. And like, you know, you're in fine, you know, representational painting. I am. Anybody that's involved in like trying to figure out and like learn all of these sort of like super difficult skill sets that take years kind of understand that. Like if you learn how to paint, you know, well, you're familiar with hard work and repetition and drills and discipline and all those types of things. Otherwise, you wouldn't have those skill sets. And I think that like my own sort of understanding of kind of systems and how to, you know, build ways to accomplish, you know, the desired outcome also has been very much impacted by, you know, studying at such an early age and learning how to draw and paint. And like literally I was an 8-year-old in an adult art school learning how to draw from life. And I think that has impacted my brain a lot because a lot of people just they're not used to stretching their brains and being uncomfortable all the time. And like, dude, if you're learning at the highest level that you can, you're always uncomfortable. Like 100%. You're uncomfortable from morning till you go to sleep, and you probably don't even have peaceful sleep because you're still trying to figure some things out, and you're waking up screaming because you're trying to figure something out, you know? Yeah. It's not like this sort of peaceful, tranquil thing. Now, I actually am kind of a big fan of what I call almost like practical Buddhism. In a certain sense. Like I'm not religious by any stretch of imagination. I just think that there's a lot of sort of different things you can learn from different places. And, you know, being by myself in the studio for like years and overworking and understanding that like, you know, there is something about being centered, about taking the time to breathe in the morning, about actually regulating your own emotions and things like that, that will actually help you become even more efficient and more productive and happier and be able to live longer. And so, you know, I wouldn't say I'm like super into one thing. Like I, you know, grew up being all about like discipline. Oh, you're tired? Shut up. Discipline, right? And then I was basically like, you know, totally overworked. I've had little burnout sessions where I'm kind of like, I can make myself do whatever, but you do that for years. And then you're like, wait a second, why is it not fun anymore? And then, so you kind of have to get back to actually enjoying yourself and caring, but you still want to be disciplined. And so like regulating all of those different things is where I kind of have started getting into like, okay, I need to build a system that doesn't push me to one extreme or the other. Like I need a system to where I can go in my desired direction consistently and without damaging myself or damaging others or damaging anything, right? And that's kind of where I think that like the super hardcore discipline needs to be balanced with a little bit of like a self-kindness and meditation maybe, and like, you know, a little bit of like thoughtfulness. And those are habits too that kind of get involved. Like I practice breathing every morning so that I don't forget to breathe when I'm painting.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That's also called meditation, but I'm actually saying that like for me, it's like 15 minutes of literally practicing breathing. Okay. So that I'm like, okay, I got this. Okay. And then so I can continue that breathing into my work because I've totally literally been painting and then been like, because like I forgot to breathe. And it's like a consistent thing with me that if I don't practice breathing, I'll forget to breathe because I'm so focused on what I'm doing. And I think different people almost like, you know, you can reside in your body, you can reside in your mind. And like, you know, like if you're doing something physical, you're almost like in this like weird in-between state where you're not like overly analytical. There's like sometimes it's like a mantra or like
for sure
circling the same thought or whatever it is.
You're reminding me there of the rowing machine that I'm on most days. Yeah.
And then you're kind of like, is that, So like I tend to accidentally almost get so caught up in my brain that I almost detach from my body. And that's kind of where like you forget to breathe. And it's also not healthy for you because then, you know, we're not only minds and thinking things. Like we have bodies. You kind of neglect your body. It'll remind you in unpleasant ways.
For sure.
And so like that's kind of where I'm saying is that like if you want to be a high level performer in anything really, you kind of have to, as I'm saying, build some sort of sustainable model of functioning, some sort of like way that you can repeat that and keep growing and keep pushing yourself without crashing.
Daniel, you're talking about something there. I mean, big fan of that as an idea. You're talking about balance, though, essentially, aren't you? I mean, people throw this word out a lot. Now, I have trouble with that word. I don't like it because when people are like, "Hey, you're just out of balance," well, my balance is different than your balance, dude. So
Exactly.
yeah,
And I actually like to balance myself with extremes,
right.
which I found that like that's why like with the whole COVID thing, I've been having an issue because like I like to go complete isolation and then go into super social events.
Sure.
And so it's basically like that's usually my balance where I like complete isolation and I just kind of go deep and come up with stuff and just kind of work completely on my own. And then I feel like kind of restless and I feel like I need to go and throw myself in a completely polar opposite type of environment. And so that is two different extremes, but they can actually balance each other. I've for a while was flirting with the idea of actually trying to be balanced. I get like listless. I get like attacks of apathy if I try to be completely balanced. I'm like, what's the point?
But what again? What is that? As an idea? Because when somebody says to you, "Oh, you're out of balance. You need to balance things out," and again,
Yeah.
I say to them, and I have had people tell me that all the time. I'm like, well, hang on a second. My balance. If you lived my life, and again, you said something else there that I do want to unpack because I love that. I love this idea of systems and having some sort of formulaic structure to the way you live your life. And that way you can kind of almost treat yourself, your body, your life as a science experiment and continue to make tweaks and adjustments so you're at the
Yeah.
optimal level. And I
Yeah.
think
See, I love doing that.
this is what it's all about. I mean, for me,
Yeah.
but again, that idea of balance. So right now, oh man, you said so much there that I want to dive into, but like thinking about this more in terms of like, what does that actually look like for you as an individual? Like, how do you truly own who you are, what your modality is, what your approach to your life is, what you want to do, what your goals are, and then trying to go, okay, well, what do I need to do? What does my daily life need to look like in
Okay.
order to
So
go there?
I am freakish when it comes to self-analysis. Like my
Awesome.
dad is like, you need to stop sometimes because like I dissect the shit out of myself. Like any truth doesn't matter how unpleasant it is. I'm into it. I'm like, okay, let's figure out where my weaknesses are, where I lack, why I like, issues, things that I actually, like you analyze yourself actually, and you, if you're like truly honest with yourself,
Yeah.
you're pretty aware of where you're lacking.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, that's where you're off balance, honestly. And
Right.
so it's kind of like, if you're super aggro and if you like tend to like lose your temper, then like, you're overly choleric as a personality type. And like you might need to, balance that by, let's say, something like meditation. If you have an issue with, motivation and you're super calm and kind of like apathetic, then you need more aggression actually. And you
Yes.
might need more sort of different types of things that make you feel more kind of alive and adrenaline based things that actually kind of rev you up. And
Right.
so that's kind of like what I'm saying. It really depends at sort of where you're lacking, what your interests are, because usually we are best at what we enjoy and we enjoy what we're best at. And so that's kind of like drawing and painting, I think really kind of helps you understand that premise to where it's like you should always be practicing what's most uncomfortable. And that's kind of the same thing with self-work. It's like if you're avoiding an area, that's usually the area that needs the most work and attention.
Mm-hmm.
And because you systematically avoid it, it makes it even more important to address.
Mm.
And so like a lot of times like I'll see people and I'm not necessarily telling them they're out of balance, but if I'm seeing someone and I'm thinking they're out of balance, it could be to one extreme or the other. And that's kind of where sometimes I'm like, dude, what do you want? And that's kind of where it gets back to balance for balance sake works for monks. I don't think it works for a lot of today's generation, today's world even.
Yeah.
And so, and also goals purely as this some sort of all encompassing, I'm sacrificing everything to get to this goal. That also backfires, right? And so if you're not coming from one extreme or the other, it's almost like what and that's why I talk about systems. Like, if you don't think about it as some sort of altruistic balancing act, that's arbitrarily important for no reason, but more in the sense of, okay, I know what direction I want to go. What can I change in my daily process, in my personality, in my sort of like habitual responses, things like that, in order to help me move in my own desired direction. Mm-hmm. And so like it's easier to motivate yourself that way, I think, too, because you're combining a sort of healthy lifestyle, a healthy sort of self-care, self-discipline, whatever it is, with actually going towards the direction that you actually want to go in. And so it's not some sort of arbitrary mythical thing that you're doing for some sort of reason because you read it in a book or because your dad told you to. It's an actual, like a way to accomplish the things that you want to accomplish. And so, I think about it less as balance and more as actual, giving yourself a chance to become who the person you want to become and accomplish what you want to accomplish. And looking at it from that perspective, you're like, okay, well, what do I want to accomplish, right? And that's where it gets into, okay, how do you know what you want to accomplish? Because a lot of people are saying, I don't know.
Oh, my goodness, man. So many people in this day and age are like, I don't know what I want to do.
Yeah. And
I don't understand
I'm
that.
usually like, well, I don't understand that either. Let me rephrase that. I do understand that.
Right.
And I think one of the reasons for that is everybody thinks that, and it does come into competitive stuff too, because like most people think they want the things that their friends want.
Right.
Most people think that they want the things that their parents want, or the opposite. They want the things they think they want because their parents don't want them to do it. And so it's basically like it's a reaction to someone else. And that's kind of where I'm coming from too, is that like if your goals are solely based on one way or another reacting to someone else, then they're not necessarily what you want. It's a reaction.
Oh man, you're really, yeah, absolutely, mate. Because and what happens when you get the goal? If you're basing it on something external like that, you're not satisfied.
No, I'm not even satisfied a lot of times when I get the goals that I want.
Right.
So my whole thing is that like I'm not even that goal oriented. Like I've like worked for years on something and then like been like like the consolation prize being like, wait, I've worked for years for this. And so it's like you put that much pressure and you work for years towards some sort of, future thing. It very rarely like brings you, full on satisfaction. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of like what I'm saying. Whereas, instead of goals, you can have direction. And so it's like if you're moving in the right direction and you're consistently moving, that progression is, I think, what makes me happiest. And so what I'm actually talking about is not accomplishing specific goals as much as progressing in my chosen path, in my chosen direction. And that gives you a feeling of actual systematic growth. And I think that's one of the things that the human brain needs to be happy.
I think so as well. I think when we're in that mode of production, so to speak, for lack of a better word, but when we're in that mode, I do think that makes us happier. I found that I became so much happier when I took my focus away from myself and what my goals were, air quotes goals, and what my ambitions were, and started focusing more on service. And as I started to focus there, then suddenly it took on a whole different meaning for me. And now it's like, well, it's not about me, what I can do, and oh gosh, look how good I can paint, or this or that, or look how much money I can make. Now it's like, well, what are you going to do with that money when you get it? And who have you helped in the meantime? What are you contributing? And the thing that gives me the biggest buzz right now, more than selling paintings or anything like that, because I used to sell a lot of paintings for a lot of money. And now the thing that really excites me is like the comments on YouTube, the messages that I get, and reports back from people who have said, I just watched this video and now I understand something new about color. And now I want to go and paint a wave. Now I want to go pick up those brushes I haven't touched in 35 years. You've inspired me. I'm like, that makes me feel like, yes, okay. So it's about,
that's awesome,
it's about a sense of service there, and that is more validated than anything I've achieved for myself. But what you're saying there, like I love that, because 100%, it's about owning who you are and your direction, isn't it? It's
exactly
about direction.
And those are not mutually exclusive at all. You're talking about an actual chosen direction that you found based on personal like introspection, trial and error, personal experience, and you're pushing yourself in that direction. So like in essence, you're doing exactly what I'm kind of talking about.
Yeah. But do you know what?
And
I'm sorry to cut you off, but one thing there though, again, it's just that the trial and error, right? It's
mhm,
it's from achieving those things, and because I got to a point where I got the money, right? I had all this stuff going for me, and I was
mhm,
miserable, dude. I was so freaking miserable all the time, and it just nothing was
interesting.
satisfying me. And I was
Yeah.
like, well, then this isn't what it's about, is it?
No. And that's kind of like what I'm saying, especially fine art or being a
Mm,
creative. Like if you're miserable doing what you're doing,
mm,
do something else.
yeah, for sure.
Because like even if you can make a good living selling paintings, it's not necessarily the easiest way to make a living either. And it's not like some sort of like people think that you're sitting there with like a smile on your face, listening to like cool music, a few brush strokes, and then
No.
you do something weird. No, it's a grinding. Like you're sitting there
Yeah.
like 12 hours
Yeah.
a day painting and like
Yeah.
arms stiff or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's not that easy. So if you're not enjoying it, then yeah, it's not necessarily, it doesn't make that much sense if you're not really into it.
Mm,
I still enjoy selling paintings, um, for sure. And it's not just the money; it's the actual like there is a certain chasing there for sure. It's
okay.
that like sort of like success chasing, and it's like it's a difficult thing. It's competitive and things like that. And I do enjoy it, but I'm kind of with you. It's not the answer to everything. It's
Mm,
not going to
mm,
like it's not like some sort of button you can keep pressing for your whole life and then just
mm,
be super super happy. It's also not going to make the work grow and like push you to the next level as an artist necessarily either.
mm,
And I've been thinking a lot about that. Like, what do I actually like? What is important to me?
mm.
And it's funny every time I go through those types of thought processes. Like, a lot of it is just seeing what I'm capable of, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like, it's the simplest type of like, almost childish motivation still is basically like, no, I want to see how far I can go.
So the competition
That's
hasn't really
it.
left you, but you're competing with
No,
yourself.
yeah. I'm competing with history. I'm competing with the world, and that's kind of like it's
Wow.
coming from. It's not a presumptuous place because I'm never gonna get where the pinnacle of everything because nobody really has, and I doubt I'll ever be as technically good as like Reppin or something like that. But that's why it's fun for me
Yeah.
because it's like this endless climb, and that's that journey. As long as I'm climbing and I'm moving in my desired direction,
Yeah.
makes me kind of happy. What I've been realizing is I can get so obsessed with that I can neglect other things that will cause problems later. And so like I
Mm,
agree with you actually that like, you know, diversifying, teaching, doing other things, it actually does not only help you, spread sort of the financial burden, but I think it's actually beneficial for your brain. And if you look at history too, every single, great artist was pretty much a teacher as well.
mm,
Because it does complement they do those disciplines do complement each other, and I think it's important to look at things from different perspectives. And
sure.
like I've realized after like starting to show at Arcadia full time, and then it was like he'd start Steve was selling the paintings as quickly as I could give them to him, and it was basically like this race of like how many like deadline after deadline after deadline, and it was super fun for a while. And then I'm just kind of like, dude, even success is some sort of draining thing to where it's like you kind of have to set your own balance as well.
Yeah.
And you do that for enough years in your bubble, and like the actual elements of inspiration start to sort of be these distant memories that you're sort of trying to chase. Like what do I care about, right?
Hmm.
And if you're living life a little bit more fully and you're still giving yourself time to explore, to see new things, to engage with people, to teach, to have these different experiences, I think that all comes back into the work. And so, touching on kind of what you were saying that like, you still paint, but you're doing other things. I actually think that that's probably, more important than ever for artists, especially now with like the whole COVID and the galleries, not being even seen in person. I think that like, original sales are going to become, slightly more difficult in the next few years. I mean, they already have, but like it's not magically going, like the economy isn't just going to magically become, great everywhere and things like
Mm,
that.
hmm.
And a lot of people don't have access to schools right now, and they can't go and study, and they're totally feeling isolated. And I
Hmm.
think that what you're doing is more relevant right now than ever. And I like recently started a Patreon to sort of share just different things in the studio, workshop, recordings, live streams, things like
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
And I do think it's super important. And like
Hmm.
I've also been engaging with people more than I ever have in the
Yeah.
past, and just answering emails and doing mentorships and things like that, and just engaging, communicating because it's important.
Hmm.
And it actually totally makes me feel good as well. It makes me feel good that I'm helping. It makes me feel good that I'm, sharing, engaging, interacting, because that's kind of the point of art in the first place. Like, the point of art isn't to, only be competitive and like make something that you're proud of and someone buys and then goes into their private collection. I mean, that's not it. That's cool. I like that aspect of it. But like, I've totally been also feeling like I want to engage with a larger audience. I want to
Yeah.
have an actual back and forth exchange, not just a one way. I want to
Yes.
hear what they think. I want to know what people are experiencing and feeling when they're seeing the work, or
Hmm.
what they're even looking for. That's also why I've been like documenting a lot more of the process and just sharing different videos about like how I'm painting and the whole process stages, because that's kind of the most interesting thing to me, is the actual way that you make things. And that kind of even gets into like, I almost paint differently than most people because I'm using the paint differently, because I'm obsessed with creating different ways of doing things.
That's almost a perfect segue, because I want to ask you all about your technique and your work itself. But before we do, I just want to go back a little bit if we can. And apologies, folks, for jumping all over the place here. But I'm curious. So you went from this young fellow. You're now doing construction at your father's art academy, and then you start teaching these classes. When did you first start becoming? Was there a clear point where it's like, I'm a professional artist now? I guess that would have been at 15, right?
No, that's the
No.
funny thing. I was like,
Okay.
maybe I'll be a lawyer. Maybe I was like
Oh
very,
wow.
yeah. Again, that's what I'm saying. I was always like more math side of things, and like I'm very kind of structured and thought process and whatnot. And I was not one of those people that was like, I need to paint to be happy.
Hmm.
That actually wasn't where I came from. I just also I started enjoying art school because of the drills and the discipline, more than the actual, like, it wasn't creative at the time. It was like still lifes and cast drawings and life studies and figure drawing, portraiture, all this sort of classical curriculum. And I basically wasn't actually even trying to make paintings. I was just trying to get better. I was also fencing competitively at the time, and so it was kind of like similar types of things. It was just training and like getting better. And like, I've always been really obsessed with the process of improvement. Like how do you get better? And that's like, I think it's funny. I think I heard like Julio Reyes was talking about something similar, where it's like, I think he was like a soccer player before, and he would love the competitiveness. And like, I think a lot of people that are competitive athletes go into the whole traditional drawing and painting, because it has like that similar element to it, where that
Oh,
systematic improvement.
shout out to
And
Lloyd Lewis, two-time world kickboxing champion, who
ha,
people
yep,
people will remember from the last podcast. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
yeah,
there
and
is
that's what I'm
definitely a link
saying.
there.
There is a link there. And I was like, again, I was homeschooled. I did fence competitively for a while. Um, but after I sort of transitioned to art, that kind of became my improvement sort of ladder, and that sort of obsessive, a way for my obsessive brain to sort of feed on something so it doesn't feed on itself. And that was my motivation for a while. And it wasn't until later that I actually got genuinely passionate. And I very much am. And that's kind of where it came a little bit later for me. And it wasn't, like, I don't know if I don't know, at like 8, 10, 15, some people that are actually super interested in actually drawing and making art, I think they're mostly coming from a slightly different place than I was, to be honest. Um, I came in from like the other side. Like, I had a lot of skills before I knew what to do with them, to be honest.
Hmm. Oh wow. Yeah.
And it's funny. I talk to like students that are like, I need to put this out, and I like, I don't know how, but I need to. And I'm kind of like, that's kind of awesome place to come from too. Like, in a certain sense, I'm like, that's awesome. Like, I'm proud of you for actually wanting something that bad, and being, and because like there is that aspect too. And so that's kind of where I'm coming in, is like, figure out how your brain ticks, and build a system or a pathway that gives you a higher chance of success. Because if you're coming in, and it's funny, I actually recently was thinking, I think most people have either a knowledge issue or a motivation issue.
Wow.
And so, like, if you think about it, like, if you're knowledgeable and you're motivated, you're fine. And so most people, like, when they're at an impasse, I'm like, usually trying to understand, is there a lack of knowledge? In which case, if you're motivated, you go acquire that knowledge and then you're fine. Or if it's the lack of motivation, or if it's lack of will. or like, and that's kind of saying, like, I think the will aspect of things is where it kind of is almost both most dangerous and most kind of difficult to pinpoint, because, what is it that actually gives us drive? What actually makes us push through things? And that's sort of like, it is different for different people. And like, I've seen it and I've almost experienced it. Like when you're will sick or like soul sick, that's when it gets super tough. And that's kind of where my, advice to people is like, try to avoid that at all costs. It doesn't matter if you're chasing the wrong thing. Don't get into that place where you're actually soul sick, because that's where it's hard to get out of there. And so,
right.
the
Soul
whole
sick.
knowledge.
That's the first time I've ever heard that, but I like that term. Right.
You see it where it's like, it's not about, you can see super talented and super capable people that just don't have the drive anymore, or like just lost whatever it was that kept them chasing.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
I call it soul sick. And it's true, because it's like I actually think that a lot of identity comes from our will.
Okay.
Like if you think about it, like I obsessively psychoanalyze myself. Like, who am I? I'm not necessarily my mind, because I actually have an identity. And even when I'm floating around in theories and stuff, I still have like a sense of self that isn't my actual brain. But, your will is who you are almost, or it's like super tied into who you are, because the will is what makes you actually choose a path or go one way or another, or think of something as important, or push through something when it's super difficult and the obstacles are overwhelming. And it's interesting too, because like I think humans almost idolize willpower. Like if you really think about more moralistic stories and all kinds of like, ancient, different, national stories from different places, or aphorisms or whatever it is, a lot of it has to do with that sort of like overcoming things and like the strength of will. Yeah. And that's kind of where I think a lot of like who we are is. And so like if you have will issues, or like difficulty in like making yourself do things, I think that's like an important thing to actually address and to like take time. And that's why I'm saying kindness is super important, because like you can't brute force some of those. Like if you're having a serious issue with motivation, you can't necessarily just brute force that. Sometimes you need to take a step back. Sometimes you need to like just lay there for a while, whatever it is, to sort of come back to a place where you can actually start to, dream and chase again.
Well, it's interesting. When I find myself in those sorts of moments, it's when I experience something that we were talking about earlier, which is burnout. My father has often said to me, he's like, Andrew, be careful. You don't know where the line is until you've crossed it. And I cross it all the time. But I find that my line is it's getting a little bit further and further and further out now, because I find that I'm like, and it's almost like I'm taking the temperature. I'm going, am I there yet? No, we're nearly redlining, not quite. And then, I'm on the couch and I'm out for days, kind of thing.
Yep.
It hasn't happened for several months.
I know that process so well.
Right, yeah. Right.
And that's kind of where it's like, I used to love pushing those boundaries. I still kind of do. I just try not to do it as often, because like my entire life was on that line.
So there's no clear cut, date as such. It just seems like this is something that has been a process of piecing it together as you kind of piece together your identity, your sense of self here. And now, you find, so when did it first start really, becoming like the self-affirming thing, where you were like, okay, I'm here, this is what we're doing, so I'm going to put off all that other stuff that I was kind of entertaining as a thought. Now it's about this. Now it's about Daniel Bilmes as an artist. This is the walk here.
It was super gradual, and it really was, you do something long enough and you push yourself hard enough, and like you really do develop like a love for it. Otherwise, you're not going to keep doing it, honestly.
For sure.
And I, to be completely honest, don't like low level shit. I like high level stuff. And so pushing through into actually being able to consider the nuance of expression, like the actual mood of a piece, like the actual fun stuff that everybody wants to get into. And, in art school, you're like told, proportions, or, you're talking about understanding how to do what you want to do. But then eventually you're able to do what you want to do. Sure. And that transition, I think, is when I really developed a passion for it, because it's a whole nother thing. And the interesting thing there is I was in art school for a while, because like I enjoy it. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's like my dad's school, I was teaching, I was studying, I'd, hire the model, set up the model however I wanted to, pick the first spot, start painting, and then the rest of the class would basically gather around. And it was super fun. But eventually I was kind of like, okay, where from here? And I don't want to get stuck in academia because a lot of artists, I think, get stuck in academia. It's kind of like, you're either in the school studying, then you're teaching in the school, you're teaching other people, you're trying to, again, evolve. But I was kind of like, okay, what do I actually want? I want to make it as an actual artist
Mm-hmm.
more than I want to be, in the sort of like art education sector for my whole life.
Right.
And it's
Yeah.
funny because I've come back to the education sector on my own terms.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, for me, it's like I want to, just because something's more difficult doesn't mean it's less appealing to me. It's more appealing usually. So I'll get myself in trouble where I'm like, okay, what's the most difficult option? I'll take that one. It's like a weird, almost backwards way where I like to challenge myself to not take the easy path, but take, like almost the hard road. Sometimes it's actually counterproductive,
Mm-hmm.
but, you know, it was for me almost like, okay, I want to make it as an artist. And then it was trying to understand. And that was when I was a little bit older. And actually, after I moved to LA, and I was like in my early 20s, that's when I was like, okay, I can paint like this, I can paint like that, I can paint like super, one way or another. Because like I always tried to get good at painting in different styles and different ways. Because again, I didn't want to only paint one way because that's the only way I was capable of. To me, it's always a cop out to pretend like you chose a path that was your only option. And so, I'm like practicing painting super, Sargent-esque, and then I'm going into super more polished stuff and getting into like, full colors, monochromatic, all these different ranges. And I was like, okay, that doesn't work. Like you need to actually pick, right? And the actual process of understanding not just, picking at random direction, but I basically put myself under the microscope and started studying my own tastes. So like I wanted to decide what way I want to paint based on what I actually want to do, based on my own choices, based on my own preferences, my own aesthetics. And so I was like, okay, I can do this and I can do that and I can do this, but what is my choice? And so I started looking at like thousands of images, like Pinterest, Instagram, everything. And I would, as soon as I felt something, like I liked an image purely on like an instinctive level, I'd save it. And then I would just look at images and images and museums and, it was art, photography, film, whatever it was, just imagery.
Mm-hmm.
And going through that, I would then dissect what is it about, like find the pattern in these images, right? So it's like, what about these images? Is there a consistency in subject matter? Is it just an abstract shape type of thing? And I actually started to piece together how my responses to art worked in a certain sense. And then I tried to build paintings almost like with those pieces. Like, I love texture. And that's what I realized. Like a lot of it had to do with the abstract textures and the abstract, some like woven lines of how like things are made. Like the way I draw and paint is almost like inside out
Mm.
more than like painting the surface. And so I like found these objects and I started to like almost compile a list of things that I was really into painting and things that I want on the wall, things that, what colors would I hang if I was painting for myself. Like
Wow.
if I had my imaginary dream home, like what painting would I create for that, for me, not for some random person that I don't care about. And so I was like, okay, the most genuine work I can make is something that I'm making for myself because I know myself best. And I'm also the most critical, asshole that I know. And so I'm basically kind of like, was analyzing my own sort of takeaways, experiences, feelings, reactions to imagery in order to actually find how I felt about things. And then I was a little bit clearer on it and I started almost like trying to build pieces with those ingredients.
I want to just touch on that. I really want to highlight what you're saying right there because what you've just enunciated there, Daniel, is probably the most important thing for any artist, in my opinion, which is being truly authentic. What piece do you want to hang on the wall? What is your unique voice? What is the thing you're trying to achieve? The amount of
Yep.
messages and kind of questions and things that I get from people that are about, hey, what should I paint? What's popular right now?
Right.
What do other
Yeah.
people want to see? I can't really think what I want to do, and I just keep getting back to them. Hey, listen, buddy, just do you. Who are you? Get that out, because what ends up happening is people are going to hate it. People are going to hate it, whatever you're doing, but there are going to be a select few people who really love it. That's your audience right there. Start painting for you, and that audience is going to show up. So for me, like, I had to put that out of my mind. I've got my critics out there. I got my haters. I got people who think, you're sappy. It's thoughtless. I mean, you're just creating this or that or whatever. I don't care about those people. It's not about them. I'm making myself happy. That's my job. I'm doing what I really want to do based on what pushes those buttons for myself. And it's essentially what you're explaining here as well. And I think out of that, you end up finding the people that genuinely love Daniel Bilmes as a result. It's like, wow. And you've also, the interesting thing is, the irony of this is, you end up creating something unique. Because again, I just want to say here that you have created figurative and portrait work with an application of the paint that I have never seen before. I've never come across this technique
Well,
before.
thanks, man. But no one is like as crazy enough to actually try to make paintings that way, because it's a super difficult, like, weird process that,
How do
like,
you
I
do it?
sometimes I'm like,
Okay,
why did I do this to myself?
take us from the start. How do you do it?
So it's funny. I actually have like three different processes that I actually work in, pretty much. And people are like, it's all super textured, but like the process is very different for different sort of paintings. And sort of like one of my favorites that I've been actually not doing that often, because that's where I hurt myself, is it's pretty much alla prima. Because I love moving paint as it's drying. And so, like, I'll scratch into it when it's almost dry. I will move it with a soft, brush when it's super wet, with a firm brush when it's a little drier. And so what I actually do, and it's usually like a smaller piece that way, is I will, like, on the first day, lay in all the paint. And again, I prepare the surface in a special way. I don't use too much paint. It's like a very specific application, consistency, exact brushes, different textures, things like that. But I'll basically, to simplify it, kind of lay in all the paint on the first day. And then for the next 2 days, I'm pretty much scratching it, scraping it, moving it as it's drying. And that's when I hurt myself, because I'll do like 16-hour days, because like I can do more when the paint's wet than I can when it's dry. And so I will literally see how many hours I can put in as it's drying. And, you don't want to do that in like a heat wave necessarily. But like when it's a little colder in the studio, I'm able to actually do these. I'll work the painting section by section, and I'll pretty much finish it in one pass. And usually for those paintings, I'll like have an area about this big that gets pretty much finished, and then I'll slowly kind of add on little pieces. And so it's kind of like, it's not
Wow.
like it's not completely alla prima, but you're getting the essence of a piece in that first bender, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're sort of stitching and weaving little elements to it. So that's like a really enjoyable, as well as sometimes damaging, way for me to work.
Mm.
And then I've also been sort of, like the way that I've worked for years, and I still sort of do a lot, is kind of breaking things up into like the grisaille stage, which is, pretty much underpainting / I'm basically like weaving my shadows together.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll come in and work the lights and midtones section by section. So it's kind of like, and then sometimes the lights and midtones will have, 2, 3, 4, 5 layers on them. And so if I'm doing, let's say, a multi-figure painting, with 3 figures and, dresses and, fabric and background, then I'll usually do it more that way, where I'm coming in. I don't do an underdrawing at all. So it's like directly onto the panel. And then I'll basically really just try to get the drawing in with oil paint. And it's usually like pretty monochrome. And again, as it's drying, I'll still move the paint, wipe it, adjust it. And then at the end, I actually have like a push pin that's stuck into a pen. I can show you. So basically, like this tool right here is where a lot of the detail work is. It's actually a push pin, and so like I'm scratching away elements of the paint when it's almost dry.
Wow.
And I created a special surface for it, which is like I start with the wood panels, and then it's like 6 coats of different things, which kind of creates, it's like a super smooth, but there's like a little tiny bit of grit on it. And it's just like the surface that works really well with my techniques. So
Brilliant. So it's a wooden panel, and do you
mhm.
lay any canvas or linen over the top, or is it just gesso straight over the top of the wood?
It's wood, then shellac, then multiple coats of gesso. Then I do like these acrylic medium washes with a squeegee to get like it super smooth. And
Wow.
then I do an oil wash. So there's like literally 6 or 7, 8 coats sometimes before I start painting.
Wow. Man,
And
that's
it creates,
laborious.
I'm creating an atmosphere. So it's like an environment almost. And
Yes.
so when I'm painting, I'm almost painting my figures into this abstract. I usually won't completely cover it. And
Mhm.
so I'll glaze into that environment. And so it almost creates depth. And so it's like it's the atmosphere, which I'm also super interested in. It's like how do you create the illusion of atmosphere of like the space around the figure? So it's not just the figure and it's not just a background, but you're also almost like feel the three-dimensional element and the sort of and the actual space around figure.
Oh, it's just
Um,
stunning work, though, and I love your mixture of imagery. I'm just looking at some of it now, like the way, the birds and the shapes of the wings interact with the figure, itself, and then the flowers as well. It's just stunning work. It's interesting as well that you use the word stitch and weave because when I look at your work, it does really remind me of embroidery. There are these little composite lines that it's in isolation there's a sharpness to it, but the
mhm.
the juxtaposition like of all of them together, it forms this smooth cohesive whole. It's beautiful stuff, man. That's really
Thanks. Yeah, I really enjoy that. It's kind of like what I'm saying. Is like even when I draw with charcoal, like I don't use a stump, I don't blend at all. I'm actually like, weaving the different lines into these solid forms. And you're an artist, it's like a lot of it is actually control over value and
yeah.
control over, understanding a form and like a lot of it comes down to control is actually what it is.
Yes, for sure.
And that's something that I also just really enjoy is it is kind of like I'll kind of make jokes. I've almost fetishized self-control in a certain sense, to where it's like I do like to do difficult things and practice level of control and dexterity to where I can pull off things that sometimes I don't know how I did it. Like I can't really forge my own paintings.
That, hang on, let me get my head around that for a second.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
like I wouldn't be able to make an exact replica of one of my paintings.
Wow. So it's each one is a unique expression. Something special
Totally.
happens.
And I've
Yeah.
tried to make really similar paintings, and
Hmm.
when I do that, they're usually not as good.
Right.
And
Right.
so I actually need to keep evolving the process. Otherwise, it almost stagnates, and I feel like it's worse than it was, which is the worst thing for me. So like if
Okay.
I feel like I'm doing this instead of this, I'm like
Wow.
I get really hard. I get really hard on myself actually. And so for me, it's almost like okay, I need to keep evolving the process. In which case, it's never the same. And so it's almost like it's almost like I'm figuring out ways to sort of use my brain and thought process in order to create interesting work. And that's also why I'm so process oriented. Is my best work comes out of me being process oriented. Like
Hmm.
my favorite paintings are the ones where I was trying a new process, to be honest, almost
Right.
always.
Right. Okay.
And it's
That's
not like
awesome.
completely new, it's slightly different. It's like
Yeah.
that slight adjustment or
Just a
like, oh, I
tweak on it.
do
Yeah.
tweak. Yeah, I
Yeah.
keep tweaking my own process.
Hmm.
And I think that's why it's so unusual, is because like I've been tweaking for years. It started with being a little bit more similar, a little bit more normal, and then I just kept pushing things that I was interested in, and I became obsessive with them, like texture, like the ways that I've come up with. Like I started actually the first pieces I ever showed at Arcadia, I did in acrylic. It was for a drawing show, and so Steve invited me for a drawing show. I always wanted to show at Arcadia, and I was super excited. And I was like, okay, I don't like a lot of finished drawings as art pieces. I love to draw. It's actually my favorite. But there's something in a painting, a certain permanence, like, depth of values, things like that, that sometimes is lacking in a lot of drawings. Like graphite doesn't get dark enough and it glares. Charcoal is kind of impermanent. I don't like to use fixative. And so like I wanted to make something that has like the perks of painting and drawing and looks like a drawing. And so I was messing with these different mediums and coming up with like, I have like all these different jars of different acrylic that was different levels of transparency. And then I would come in with this tiny brush and I would just hatch with it.
Wow.
And so like I did this whole drawing out of these hatch marks. And then that's when I started with a pin, push pin. I would scratch into it. So it was almost like this hatch lines with a brush. And then I would scratch into it with a pin to sort of bring the lights back. And so it was basically this like super delicate scratch lines with all these like delicate lines. And then I'm like, okay, I loved it. And I enjoyed doing it, even though that was super time intensive. And so then I actually tried to translate that process a little bit more to oil, because I was like, oil is my first love. And that's always like, where I kind of gravitate back towards. And so a lot of my oil painting process came from my weird acrylic experimentation, which came from my charcoal drawing.
Wow,
and so it kind of came full circle.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like I'm trying to take, because like my charcoal drawing is where I originally actually developed my style and process, to be honest. Yeah. That's like the most natural free flow, where it's like all straight lines that I sort of weave together into these forms, right? Mm-hmm. And then I was like, okay, how do I make that work in paint? And a lot of the tools that I use, like even these like different rubber tools, like I'll use the edge of them, and
cool.
It makes these straight lines. Yeah.
It's like, what is that? That literally just looks like a cake spatula.
It is, and I have like different ones, and like I use these things a lot in painting.
Wow, man.
And the push pin. So like I'll usually, like I don't take paint, mix it, put it on a brush, and just apply it, like ever. There's always these weird processes and things that I do with the paint and different tools that I use.
Wow, man.
Like I hate glare.
Glare.
And so glare. Yeah, I declared war on glare when I was like 12. And so like I hate it when you know like a bristle brush in a dark paint, and you make that juicy brush stroke with like a shadow, and then like it's forever glares.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. That's why I don't use bristle brushes for shadows for the most part. I use synthetics.
Obviously, right?
There you
go. Yeah. And so like I took it further to where like I'll apply the darks usually with those almost like spatula-like things, which makes it totally flat so it doesn't glare.
Right, absolutely.
And then or I'll like glaze it over like 5 layers so that it's completely flat so there's no glare. So it's like little idiosyncrasies like that. I kind of like put them all together into this like weird painting process. Yeah. That is, I don't know if I'd call it painting. I'm using paint, but I don't really feel like I'm painting.
You're really pushing the boundaries, aren't you? I mean, it really is pushing that definition as such, because it does sound a lot like drawing. It's interesting as well to hear how all of these different things, you're explaining how it's coming full circle from the drawing to the acrylic painting to oil painting, and now, back again. I'm finding that drawing is really causing me to revisit oil painting with new eyes. It really is.
Totally.
Because I've just recently, I had neglected drawing for years. And now, because I was just painting all the time. I wasn't really doing much sketching. Yep. Sketching was just part of
I've gone through that too.
Yeah, it was just part of the design process to work out what my composition was doing. So I didn't start off blind with the painting, but it was like, okay, got my composition. All right, let's go. But I would never be just drawing for drawing's sake. But now that I'm actually doing finished drawings, it's causing me to go into the image more, tease out more detail, focus on my tones. And I think the paintings are getting better as a result as well.
Totally. I mean, like Ong at his atelier, he had a sign that basically read, "You come here to learn how to draw, and you leave knowing how to paint."
Awesome. I love that.
And so, yeah, there is like drawing. It's funny. Edward Lanteray, who was Rodin's teacher, had a saying in his book basically that drawing is more important for sculptors than it is for painters. So everyone is basically drawing. Any great teacher is basically teaching drawing more than anything.
That's it.
And it's true. It really is the foundation of everything. And, the painting aspect of things is where I think it really ties into aesthetic and personal choice. And that's kind of where it kind of comes in to where, drawing does as well. But as a teacher, you're almost teaching more, drawing. The logistics of medium for sure. People really want to know like which mediums, which color combinations, things like that, which is helpful. You can give people a working model so so that they can actually start painting instead of like, working with a palette that's so off balance that it doesn't even make any sense, things like that. But I do think that like the drawing elements it's the framework on which we build our paintings for sure. And, that is pretty generally agreed on by almost any, teacher in drawing or sculpture, or sorry, painting or sculpture. And so I do think it all comes back to drawing. And that's where, my own obsession with drawing and the way that I drew differently than other people actually ended up translating into me painting differently than other people. And, also like color, for instance, like I used to paint super colorful paintings. And you know why? This is kind of the funny thing, is it's harder. Like I was like, okay, what's the most difficult color? Like real impressionistic understanding of color is probably the most difficult. And then what's the hardest way to draw? It's like, okay, fully constructive Russian sort of academic, structural drawing. And I was like, what if I marry the two, right? Make fully modeled real drawing with like impressionistic color.
Oh, you're living dangerous. Oh, man.
Exactly. You know exactly what I'm talking about. And I was like, okay, that is probably the most difficult thing to do. So obviously that's what I'm chasing. And so I had like a full colorist, Henry Henschy.
That's a new name for me.
Shanks.
That's a new name.
I went and studied with Nelson Shanks for like for a little bit. My dad actually sent me there for a workshop. And Nelson Shanks is a big colorist, and his color teacher, I think, was Henry Henschy. And if I'm remembering correctly, I might be totally off actually. And so his palette was like these, all of these super high chroma colors. And I was like, okay, I got this. Let's do this. And so I was painting using a lot more color in my paintings. And then as I was sort of putting myself through this sort of like, aesthetics, self-analysis, process, I started realizing that most of the images I like do not have a bunch of bright colors in them. Almost none of them do. And so I was basically like, wait a second. I love little splashes of design color. It's not that I dislike color. I like color to be designed in the painting, and where you're actually not being literal with color, but you're using color to, just the same way as you use values or some, same way as you use anything else. Like I like designed color instead of, oh, why is this color here? Because it was in front of me. And I actually don't like a lot of paintings that are painted from a slightly literal position of color. And that's just something I actually found after practicing painting that way for years.
Right. Okay.
And I'm glad I actually went through that, because even though my color is subtle, I actually used some interesting color combos and some pretty saturated colors in my palette to sort of bring in those like subtle cools in the face, things like that, so that it's not just different variations of gray, which I don't like necessarily.
It's looking at your use of color here, and this portrait here I'm looking at right now at the moment is simply called Anonymous 8x12 oil on panel. Beautiful, absolutely stunning. But I'm looking at it. I'm thinking just off the top of my head. Let's just see if I can do it. I definitely think you've got a magenta of sorts, but probably raw umber, raw sienna,
burnt sienna.
Okay.
Yeah. Yellow ochre.
Okay. Yeah. Any phthalos or any?
The phthalo green and permanent rose. Those are the two you're picking up on correctly.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Because I mean, this one especially, it's got that little hint in the eyes.
And you know how saturated phthalos are.
Oh, they're intense. I've heard it referred to, and I've talked about this in the in some of my videos, that it's a bully. It goes around, knocks crap out of all the other colors on the palette.
Totally. Yeah. I love phthalo green. So I basically like my phthalo green and my permanent rose with the yellow ochre deep, which I use actually only Michael Harding yellow ochre deep. It's like a super saturated yellow ochre. It's amazing.
Right.
So it's like a golden color. And it has more tinting strength than most yellow ochres, and so it can actually balance the permanent rose and the phthalo green.
Right.
And with those colors, and I also use lead white, and the white, it pretty much covers all the cools in the face.
That right there is a limited palette in and of itself, isn't it? So I'm making
Kind
a
of, yeah.
note. I'm making a note of this. So we got phthalo green, permanent rose, yellow ochre, and a Kremnitz white. I'll put there as a lead white.
Yeah.
I'm going to play with that. I'm going to give you full credit in my color mixing video because
Totally.
I find that so interesting.
It's amazing what happens like when you add white to the permanent rose and the phthalo green, it almost creates a warm blue. It's a freakish
Yeah.
thing. You can make a warm blue, which is like almost an impossibility in itself. Yeah.
Counterintuitive. Yeah.
And then with the yellow ochre, and I use Yellow Ochre Deep by Michael Harding. Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
I wonder if I could get away with a transparent yellow oxide. 'Cause that's what I got
Possibly.
here.
Yeah, because a lot of ochres are too gray and they get
Yeah.
overpowered by the high chroma
And
colors.
they're very opaque too.
Yeah.
My yellow ochre here I'm using is pretty darn opaque. It's got a very high tinting strength, but that transparent
Hmm.
yellow oxide I think would work really well. But
Totally, yeah.
dude,
Indian yellow mixed into there would also
right,
could work well.
right.
But yeah, with the white, it gives you such a range because like most of the time the cools in the face will either go to the violet
Mm,
or the green. You
wow.
know, they don't really go blue that often. Sometimes they do, but like the actual, you know, our veins look green, and then like there's all those pinks and hues, and so like the
Totally.
combination of I usually like I'll take my cools either slightly to the red, the pink, or
Hmm.
slightly to the green, and I'll play them off of each other. And that's something I actually did learn from Nelson Shanks and the whole color thing. Whereas like, you know, you have to pick, otherwise you mix mud. And so it's almost like you have to compare the different cools to each other and decide which one's going more violet, which one's going more green. Otherwise they're all in this sort of weird gray area.
Extraordinary. Yeah. And you've painted somebody here, perennial, um, beautiful, darker skinned lady here. It's just phenomenal. So how would you treat a darker skin tone? You know,
You know,
yeah, more African kind
totally.
of tones, because there's
Yeah,
I see a lot of subtle blues coming through, but that may be a little bit more heavy with the sienna because there's this beautiful
for sure.
flush of warmth coming through the eyes and the nose there. I'm geeking out right now, dude. This is so cool.
Thanks, man. Yeah, so my original two colors that I always start the painting with is burnt sienna and ultramarine blue.
Oh,
And the cool thing with the burnt sienna and ultramarine blue combo is instead of using like a burnt umber, is it allows you to also go cooler and warmer, darker and lighter. And so you're actually like I'll mix certain areas a little bluer and darker,
mhm.
warmer and redder. And so I start thinking about cools and warms from the beginning. And so even in my, you know, monochromatic underpainting, it's not one generic color. Like I'll push the underpainting slightly warmer in areas and slightly cooler in areas. And that kind of helps me set a theme, especially like a temperature theme in a painting.
Mhm.
And the interesting thing with darker skin is the value range is wider, but the lights are not any darker. So it's like the highlights on super dark skin are just as bright. Sometimes they almost seem like brighter by contrast than the highlights on super light pale skin. And so usually the, you know, ultramarine blue and burnt sienna is just going to be in, you know, covering more of the area, but then that sort of combination of permanent rose, phthalo green, and yellow ochre definitely still comes in. It just usually kind of gets glazed over the underpainting that's, you know, a little bit more prevalent, or it's coming in narrower areas within like highlights and lights.
Hmm. Wow.
Because, you know, the burnt sienna ultramarine and ultramarine blue is already like a really great combo for a lot of the darker skin tones.
Phenomenal. Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm like literally making notes right now. I'm gonna go play with some paint after this. This is awesome. You're an
Thanks, man.
intense dude, Daniel, if you don't mind me saying. So
Seriously?
you managed to, but it's in a good way, in a really good way, because you just seem like you're totally engaged, totally inspired. You're thinking constantly. Um, how's your poor wife? How does she do it?
Um, Taking it day by day.
Okay, okay, and
No, that's
I
fine.
ask you that
Yeah,
because
that's fine.
I feel I'm a little bit similar, and I managed to find somebody, you know, with who's foolish enough to marry me nearly 10 years ago, and
Yeah.
you know,
I
bless
tell her
her.
she has terrible taste in men, always has.
But the thing is that I'm just curious. I mean, it's kind of going back a little bit to what we were talking about at the start of our conversation and that idea of balance. I always find this very interesting. I look at my wife and I'm like, you actually balance me out. Because I've got all this stuff going on. I'm like, go, go, go. And I'm training hard. I'm working hard. I'm trying to get all this stuff done. And she is just much more relaxed, much more, just take it as it comes type person and totally levels me out.
Yeah. I mean, my wife is pretty amazing. We had our first anniversary. Our wedding anniversary was earlier this year, basically. So we got married last year, and it's been awesome. She's also creative, and so she's a photographer. She actually helps me a lot of times when we're shooting references and things like that. And so she's interested in the arts, and I think that really helps. Because I do talk a lot about random things that I nerd out on, and sometimes I'm like, are you interested? And I think at this point, sometimes she just pretends that she is because, it's a nice thing to do. But I know for a fact that in the beginning she was interested.
Right. Yeah.
When we started dating,
Awesome, man. Awesome. Oh, lucky us, huh?
Totally.
Oh, man.
Yeah, she's also in a lot of my paintings, which actually was like one of the... I realized a while ago that I probably shouldn't marry someone that I'm not into painting. Right. Because, you paint a lot of oceans. I paint a lot of women. And so it's funny. I had a relationship back in the day, and I remember the questions like, why don't you paint me more? And I was like, okay, I need to avoid that one. So you kind of have to marry someone that you want to paint.
Yeah, absolutely. I've drawn Rachel several times, but I need to paint her more. I have done very few paintings. There's actually a painting that I did of her that's just sitting off screen here that I always keep above the desk. But it was a demo for a class. But yeah, I need to do that more. Too many, less waves, more portraits of Rachel. Oh man.
No, man, I'm actually saying that you have great excuses. It's it's not you. It's I just I'm into the waves, man.
It's interesting. I've recently started becoming a lot more active on social media. So I'm literally just posting what I'm working on at the moment and trying to post twice a day to Instagram and Facebook. And, through the process of doing that, it's like, what am I going to post? Well, I might as well post what I'm working on and how far I got today. And so, it looks like I've done a lot of waves, but the waves actually, I haven't painted a seascape in a long time before this recent series. So I got a commission.
I dig the series, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
I really like what you're doing with the waves, and your explanations are pretty great with, I've also been nerding out a little bit on just different, channels and sort of social streams, because where else are you seeing art right now?
Right.
Seriously.
Yeah.
And not only that, but as I said, I just started a sort of Patreon channel. I'm also creating more content. And so that's how I actually discovered you more seriously. Because I had seen your work before, but actually paying attention to content is when I found your stuff. And I was like, wow, he's making great content. And that's actually your content is how I got, introduced to your work. Right.
Oh, okay. Well, that's cool.
Yep.
Awesome.
Totally.
Well, but it's awesome getting an opportunity to meet you and just geek out about art and life. It's interesting how these connections take place. I've met so many people through the podcast and through just putting content out there, and either they find me or I find them. But I've made a lot of connections with a lot of people around the world, and I just find that it's conversations like these that just do add a lot of richness and color to the overall landscape, I think. And I'm getting more out of it than anybody, I think.
It's funny because I was basically almost flirting with the idea of starting a podcast myself in order to actually have great conversations, because that's something I'm missing. Totally. Yeah. So when you invited me, I'm like, sure, totally. I'd like to talk to you regardless. Yeah. And that's kind of where I'm at as well. I don't necessarily have the, time right now because I'm doing all these other projects and I have so many painting deadlines to actually launch a podcast, but I'm into it too. And that's kind of what I'm saying. I think, this type of exchange and just different thoughts and talking to people, doesn't matter where they are with the podcast, which is cool, in different settings and, exchanging different, philosophies and perspectives is really kind of where it comes into. I think it's super interesting, and I think it's very
Absolutely.
beneficial for us as, hopefully someone's going to get something out of this.
Oh, I'm sure they will. I mean, for
But
me, even listening to some of your answers and things, like I've had several light bulb moments, and I think that this is the point of it as well. It's that I'm always just talking to that one person as well, and hoping that if just one person will find something from what you've said, because you have an interesting and unique take on living as an artist, and there have been so many little gems in this conversation alone that I know I've gotten something out of it.
oh, thanks, man.
I'm curious though, mate. Like, what's next for you? Because we do live in a very interesting time right now. Very interesting time, and I'll just give you a little snapshot of where I'm coming at it from. I have a very I'll have a very alternative view of what this current pandemic is all about. I'll leave it there. What I'm more concerned about for us as artists is how we're going to approach and meet the new economic paradigm.
Me too. It's
Yeah,
funny. I don't know how alternative your position is. We don't need to get into it, but I actually think that
we'll
like a
do
lot
it
of
off
people are
air.
probably with that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think a lot of people are probably, not necessarily disagreeing with you. So, the sort of economic ramifications and lifestyle shifts, that is sort of where I'm at as well, because kind of where I'm at is, don't try not to worry too much about the things that you can't really affect. There's enough, to keep you occupied, and there's enough things that need your attention, especially when the economy's tanking. And so I'm kind of at like, you need to stay on track more than ever now. And so like, going super far into directions that, aren't directly helping you and your family is not necessarily as difficult as it is to avoid these days almost. It's almost like you kind of have to keep yourself on track. Otherwise, a year is going to pass. There's going to be difficulties to deal with, most likely. And so like, if you're not doing well and if you're not sort of building your own life, then it's only going to be worse. And so that's kind of like where I'm coming from there. And we've all, it's so easy to get distracted now that you almost have to like shut it off a little bit while still kind of paying attention, because you can't stick your head in the sand and just hope for the world to just take care of itself either necessarily.
No, no.
And so that kind of dichotomy of like, how do you stay on track? What is the track when everything is changing all the time? And it's interesting, some of my sort of more recent epiphanies have been, I'm not setting any clear goals in the next year or two. I'm actually focusing on direction, and I'm still working on my 5-year goals, 10-year goals. I'm working towards what I genuinely want, and I'm just adapting to the necessities as they come a
Right,
little bit more.
right.
And, diversification is like one sort of element also that I've been focusing on, is that like, yeah, I'm with you. Like having all of your income come only from gallery shows, stressful.
Yeah, for sure.
And so, because it's basically like, it's that unknown, like, you don't know, I mean, Arcadia is a great gallery, but like, who knows what's going to happen in the next year or two, or like if galleries are even functioning or like whatever. And
Oh man.
so, from that perspective, what else do you do? And I'm still trying to make the best paintings I've ever made. And so I think it kind of comes to like a few things. One, if it, good enough isn't good enough. Basically, like if you're taking the time away from everything else in painting, try to make the best paintings you can possibly make, and things that are so good that even if they don't sell right now, you have like a strong belief that they're worth making. And eventually, somebody will agree with you. And so that's like one thing. Don't flood the market. There's no reason to. Be more selective with, what you're doing. Try to save a little time for other things and make the best paintings only. And what those other things are kind of depends. Like I've been doing some actual, I've been teaching online workshops, and so far I think I've done 3 or 4, and they've all been donation based. So I've been kind of like, you know what, everybody's stuck at home. Everyone's kind of, feeling a little lost, or a lot of people are. And some people can't really afford expensive ass workshops right now. And so I just been doing these donation based workshops, and they've actually been kind of great. Like a lot of people have been, benefiting, and like they're super, actually like writing emails and grateful and things like that. And that actually makes me feel good. Like I feel like I'm helping a little bit somehow,
Awesome.
like as an artist, like how do you help? And so it's kind of like that. I'm trying to actually help people that, directly, not try to sign people up for donating to some other fundraiser. That's like something that I like. It's like this new thing is almost like telling other people to pay for something for a third party, whereas I'm kind of like, what can I actually give people directly a little bit more, if that makes sense. And I've been sort of, doing that a little bit. And so as I'm saying, I started a Patreon channel after COVID, and have just been kind of diversifying a little bit and like doing other things. Like normally I actually teach physical workshops. And so like I've been kind of scheduling some workshops for next year, which I'm looking forward to, but it's also kind of this kind of ephemeral thing up in the air. Where it's like I was supposed to teach a workshop in May in Moscow. That obviously got canceled. Now it's scheduled for next May. We'll see. And so like I'm not changing everything. I'm not like hesitating to make plans because, dude, if I need to change the plans, we'll change the plans, It's almost like I'm also not like setting these concrete goals of like I need to do this in a year and a half, because I'm like I don't know what that year and a half is going to look like. And so my goals are a little bit more like grow as an artist, actually make meaningful work that I genuinely like, and try to pay expenses with not only money coming in from galleries, to be completely honest, where it's like have some sort of other side hustle, diversification, teaching, prints, things like that, so that I'm not sacrificing the quality of the paintings. Because as soon as you start worrying about paying rent with your painting, it's hard to like push it to the same level. It's not quite the same thing. Like there needs to be that level of like freedom to actually take chances with your paintings, and that's kind of like where I'm at, where it's basically like, what, expenses aren't that, I'll figure it out. It's not that difficult. It's actually like, I want to be happy in 2 years with what I've accomplished as an artist. And it doesn't need to be, maybe it's less paintings, but as long as I feel like there's some of the best paintings I've done, that's its own sort of accomplishment, to be honest.
Sure.
And that's something that I think is super important. And that's kind of like what I'm saying. Like I have a bunch of shows on my docket, so I'm still working towards them. I just feel like sometimes, you need to diversify a little bit these days so that you're not actually messing with the quality of the paintings.
Absolutely.
Like I've got 3 group shows this year, I think, and then my solos next year at Arcadia. So like I need to start working. That's a year from now.
Right.
And I actually have a few pieces going to Bain Art Gallery in Australia. So it's more in your neck of the woods in Melbourne.
Oh, right. Oh, okay. Yeah, cool. Well, I'm in another country in New Zealand, but it is still down
I
under,
know. It's
technically.
closer to you, man.
It's close enough, yeah.
Come on.
It's amazing, though. There's a lot of people that still think New Zealand's a territory in Australia, but I used to live just outside of Melbourne.
I know it's not. I was just more saying that, like, it's in your neck of the woods is what I'm saying.
Yeah, for sure, dude. That's right. That's right.
Sensitive spot, huh? Is there like a...
No, I just want to make sure that people listening don't get it twisted. You're all good, dude.
Oh, yeah. No. I'm just more kind of like, saying it's like saying your neck of the woods if you're in Italy and I'm talking about France.
Yeah,
or
absolutely. No, for sure.
Belgium, for that matter.
I think what you're touching on there, though, again, the diversification. I mean, when times are uncertain, this is time for us to not be spendthrift, for us to focus on really structuring the day. Maybe, pulling back that focus from those really huge goals, the overarching goals, but focus more on the direction. One of the things I've done that I just want to share with you and the people listening is I've started doing these weekly sheets that I keep out, and I'm writing on there and I'm ticking things off, and I've got like actual things down the side of that sheet that are more the weekly focus and direction. But then I have got 2 different forms of accountability, and that is 2 people that are now working for me, 2 editors working for me. And on top of that, it's the people that are waiting on the content. So I'll make an announcement that something's going to happen. And the people following me by now know that very often it doesn't happen quite the way I say it's going to.
Yeah.
But the thing is it builds in there this little bit of a pain point where I'm like, okay, at least I'm pushing. So I heard this from Dr. John DiMartini.
You're also sick. I get it, man.
I'm insane. I from John DiMartini said, when you shoot for the stars and you hit a planet, well, at least you left the orbit of the Earth. At least you've made it outside.
It's funny. There's another version of that is if you shoot for the moon and you miss, at least you land in the stars.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this is really what we should be doing is pushing right now, but pushing in such a way that we're maximizing productivity, but we're really also being very conscious about it. Don't just get busy for busy's sake, but be very
Totally.
conscious about what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, it also depends. Like honestly, like surprising, not even surprisingly, like thankfully, like I just
Yeah.
had a few sales at Arcadia, and like Steve's also a great gallerist, and like it's not like people aren't buying art.
Hmm.
It's just they might stop.
Sure.
It's one of those things, and it's
They
basically
might.
like that's the feeling to where it's like, should I put this extra week into this piece that might already be good enough to sell if I don't even know if anybody's even buying? You know what I'm saying? It's
Oh,
that type
absolutely.
of thought process where I'm kind of like, you know what, you need to separate that, because
Yeah.
like you can't do that, and the work needs to grow, the work needs to be the best, and there's other things to do, and that's kind of where I'm at, where I'm
Mhm.
basically kind of like, listen, if I get to a place where I've made like 15, 20 amazing paintings and nobody's buying them, I'll figure out something else to do. And that's kind of like what I'm saying, like saying that I'm not going to make the great paintings
Mhm.
because I don't know if people are going to buy them. That's a cop out.
Sure. No, for sure.
You know what I'm saying? That's kind of like where it's like you're your own worst enemy then, because like and then you can always second guess yourself, because like who knows what's going to happen. And so I'm basically like more kind of in this place where I would advise people to I don't know, be a little bit more open to side hustles or to doing slightly different things, to actually like almost examine their process and figure out, like, it's also like what I've realized, it's hard when everything you do is difficult. Like sometimes, isn't it just nice to like do one thing where it's like, okay, maybe I'll get like a high reward for a little effort. I'm not saying that's easy either to accomplish. I'm just more saying that like the constant super high effort for rewards becomes overwhelming, especially in difficult times. And so that's kind of where I'm at. Like you can be a little bit more entrepreneurial with certain things and then still leave enough time to actually make great art. That might actually be better in sort of today's, economic situation than doing the whole, I'm just, putting more hours into the studio. And you were kind of saying the same thing, and just keeping my head down and just pounding at effort. That's not, you need to be a little bit more sort of strategic, I think, these days.
And I think there's something to be said for efficiency. And again, this also comes back to systems. If you build a level of synergy into that system where things are feeding off each other, then...
Okay, so you're touching on something that I've been totally, being
Yeah.
very sort of excited about. And that's kind of why, like creating content, for instance,
Mhm.
it makes you almost paint better, and you're
Oh, yeah.
already creating the things that you would make, and now you're creating a whole nother stream, not just of revenue, but actually of a way to interact with the audience. And so
Absolutely.
it's not pulling you away from the painting. If anything, it's making you paint better, engage with the audience more, even get more feedback and understand how people are engaging and reacting to your work. And so I'm all for it. And if you have those 2 or 3 synergistic types of like both things that you do, as well as revenue streams, I think that's like very, very productive, and it'll also help you sort of evolve as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
For
Daniel,
sure.
I could keep talking to you for hours, mate. I really could. And I might, what we might do is maybe, if you're willing, consider this part 1 and maybe do a part 2 down the track somewhere, because I feel that we
Totally,
have a lot
man.
to talk about. And I'm just so excited, man, watching your work and seeing your approach to painting, and now hearing more about your personal story. I'm excited to follow you even more. So I hope people listening
Thanks,
to
man.
this,
Appreciate it.
take the chance now to just go and find you on Instagram, check out your website and all of your amazing paintings there. But what's the
Thank you.
best way now for people to connect with you?
Honestly, I've been very active on social, so Instagram is good, and email is great. So it's like, if you actually really want my sort of like to send me a message, email is the best, and you can find it on my Instagram as well. So like Instagram is probably like the single easiest way to sort of follow me and keep track of what I'm doing.
Perfect.
And yeah, there's even some links from there for the website and Patreon, stuff like that.
Wonderful. Well, Daniel, this has been an absolute blast. Thank you so much for being on the
Thank you,
Creative
Andrew.
Endeavour.
It's been great. It really has. I think I might do more podcasts. This has been fun.
Well, I really hope that you've enjoyed this episode of the Creative Endeavour podcast, and a huge thank you to Daniel Bilmes for joining me. Now, if you want to find more of Daniel Bilmes' work, you can find him on Instagram at BilmesArt and on his website at www.danielbilmes.com. Make sure you check out his exquisite portraiture there, and you'll see what I'm talking about. It's really amazing work, painted in a really unique way. Extraordinary stuff. Of course, you can find out more about me on my website at andrewtischler.com. Make sure you subscribe to this channel and hit the notification icon so you're notified when I drop another podcast. But also, if you want to listen to this podcast on the go, there's an audio version too on iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, and Spotify. You'll find those links down below as well. It has been an absolute pleasure having your company here once again, and I look forward to being with you in another episode of The Creative Endeavor.